大家好，
大家好，
又到讀你聽嘅時間啦，
係
亦都係我哋呢個斷食嘅第一日啦，係嘛？其實就一日半啦，其實就第一日啦咁啦。咁所以呢，嗰個可能唔夠氣啊，講嘢大家體諒下。咁我哋而家繼續讀緊呢個 Dickens Great Expectations 嘅 Chapter 45，OK？第3部嘅開始咗㗎啦，其實已經應該要進入故事嘅軌道啦。咁故事發展到咩軌跡啊
？Estella 話佢會同阿 Drummle 一齊咁咯。係
啦，咁一齊嘅意思係咩咧？
結婚
係啦，嫁俾佢喎，唔係高歐喎嚇，冇搞錯，嗰個年代都冇咩所謂高唔高歐喎，一係就一齊，係嘛？咁engage 咗俾佢先啦，係嘛？將會咁Pip 嘅反應係點咧？
佢講晒自己嘅內心世界。
咁梗係叫佢唔好啦，係咪啊？即係話我唔俾你同佢一齊，但係 Estella 當然係唔理佢啦。佢話其實我唔同佢一齊，我都會同第二個一齊㗎啦。我只不過係厭倦咗之前嗰啲生活啫嘛，係咪？咁我都好明白 Estella 嘅心境喎，其實。咁但係佢揀就可能揀得唔算好好啦，因為呢個 Drummle 都個人格即係似乎都係一般少少啦，即係成日喺成日喺 Fringe Club 度喺度講埋晒啲乜嘢即係喺度即係不務正業咁啦。不過可能佢事業好嘅，我都唔係好清楚記得。佢好似做嘢都係一般嘅咁樣。但係咧，阿 Pip 走咗離開咗 Havisham 屋企之後咧，佢又收到個信息喎，唔係手機傳嚟嘅信息係佢收到封信係啦，咁信件就叫佢唔好翻屋企，係啦，叫佢唔好翻屋企喎，咁有啲突如其來啦，係嘛？咁有啲追看性咁喎，阿 Dickens 犀利喎，咁睇下有啲咩事情發生啦，好嗎？好 Chapter 45. Turning from the temple gate as soon as I had read the warning, I made the best of my way to Fleet Street, and there got a late hackney chariot and drove to the Havishams in Covent Garden. In those times, a bed was always to be got there at any hour of the night, and Chamberlain, letting me in at his ready wicket, lighted the candle next in order on his shelf and showed me straight into the bedroom next in order on his list. 佢而家下榻咗喺呢間叫做 Havishams 喺 Covent Garden 嘅一個小旅館。It was a sort of vault on the ground floor at the back, with a despotic monster of a four-post bedstead in it, straddling over the whole place, putting one of his arbitrary legs into the fireplace and another into the doorway, and squeezing the wretched little washing stand in quite a defiantly righteous manner. As I had asked for a nightlight, the Chamberlain had brought me in, before he left me, the good old constitutional rushlight of those virtuous days, an object like the ghost of a walking cane, which instantly broke its back if it were touched, which nothing could ever be lighted at, and which was placed in a solitary confinement at the bottom of a high tin tower, perforated with round holes that made a staringly wide-awaking pattern on the walls. When I had got into bed and lay there footsore, weary and wretched, I found that I could no more close my own eyes than I could close the eyes of this foolish Argus. And thus, in the gloom and death of the night, we stared at one another. What a doleful night! How anxious, how dismal, how long! There was an inhospitable smell in the room of cold soot and hot dust, and as I looked up into the corners of the tester over my head, I thought what a number of blue-bottle flies from the butchers, and earwigs from the market, and grubs from the country must be holding on up there, lying by for next summer. This led me to speculate whether any of them ever tumbled down, and then I fancied that I felt light falls on my face, a disagreeable turn of thought suggesting other and more objectionable approaches up my back. When I had lain awake a little while, though extraordinary voices with which silence teens began to make themselves audible, the closet whispered, the fireplace sighed, the little washing stand ticketed, and one guitar string played occasionally in the chest of drawers. At about the same time, the eyes on the wall acquired a new expression, and in every one of those staring rounds I saw written, "Don't go home." Whatever night fancies and night noises crowded on me, they never warded off this "don't go home." It plated itself into whatever I thought of as a bodily pain would have done. Not long before, I had read in the newspapers how a gentleman unknown had come to the Hummums in the night, and had gone to bed, and had destroyed himself, and had been found in the morning weltering in blood. It came into my head that he must have occupied this very fault of mine, and I got out of bed to assure myself that there were no red marks about, then opened the door to look out into the pastures and cheer myself with the companionship of a distant light, near which I knew the chamberlain to be dozing. But all this time, why I was not to go home, and what had happened at home, and when I should go home, and whether Provis was safe at home, were questions occupying my mind so busily that one might have supposed there could be no more room in it for any other theme. Even when I thought of Estella, and how we had parted that day forever, and when I recalled all the circumstances of our parting, and all her looks and tones, and the action of her fingers while she knitted, even then I was pursuing, here and there and everywhere, the caution, "Don't go home." When at last I dozed, in sheer exhaustion of mind and body, it became a fast shadowy verb which I had to conjugate. Imperative mood, present tense. Do not thou go home. Let him not go home. Let us not go home. Do not ye or you go home. Let not them go home. Then potentially I may not and I cannot go home, and I might not, could not, would not, and should not go home, until I felt that I was going distracted, and rolled over the pillow and looked at the staring rounds upon the wall again. I had left directions that I was to be called at 7, for it was plain that I must see Wemmick before seeing anyone else, and equally plain that this was a case in which his Walworth sentiments only could be taken. It was a relief to get out of the room where the night had been so miserable, and I needed no second knocking at the door to startle me from my uneasy bed. The castle battlements arose upon my view at 8 o'clock. The little servant happened to be entering the fortress with 2 hot rolls. I passed through the postern and crossed the drawbridge in the company, and so came without announcement into the presence of Wemmick as he was making tea for himself and the aged. An open door afforded a prospective view of the aged in bed. "Hello, Mr. Pip," said Wemmick. You did come home, then?" "Yes," I returned, "but I didn't go home." "That's all right," said he, rubbing his hands. "I left a note for you at each of the temple gates on the chance. Which gate did you come to?" I told him. "I'll go round at the others in the course of the day and destroy the notes," said Wemmick. "It's a good rule never to leave documentary evidence if you can help it, because you don't know when it may be put in. I'm going to take a liberty with you. Would you mind toasting this sausage for the HP?" I said I should be delighted to do it. "Then you can go about your work, Mary Jane," said Wemmick to the little servant, "which leaves us to ourselves. Don't you see, Mr. Pip?" he added, winking as she disappeared. I thanked him for his friendship and caution, and our discourse proceeded in a low tone, while I toasted the aged sausage, and he buttered the crumb of the aged's roll. "Now, Mr. Pip, you know," said Wemmick, "you and I understand one another. We are in our private and personal capacities, and we have been engaged in a confidential transaction before today. Official sentiments are one thing. We are extra-official." I cordially assented. I was so very nervous that I had already lighted the aged sausage with a torch and been obliged to blow it out. "I accidentally heard yesterday morning," said Wemmick, "being in a certain place where I once took you, even between you and me, it's as well not to mention names when avoidable." "Much better not," said I. "I understand you." "I heard there by chance yesterday morning," said Wemmick, "that a certain person not altogether of uncolonial pursuits, and not unpossessed of portable property, I don't know who it may really be, We won't name this person. Not necessary, said I. Had made some little stir in a certain part of the world where a good many people go, not always in gratification of their own inclinations, and not quite irrespective of the government expense. In watching his face, I made quite a firework of the age's sausage, and greatly discomposed both my own attention and Wemmick's, for which I apologized. By disappearing from such place and being no more heard of thereabouts, from which, said Wemmick, conjectures had been raised and theories formed. I also heard that you at your chambers in Garden Court Temple had been watched, and might be watched again. By whom? Said I. I wouldn't go into that, said Wemmick evasively. It might clash with official responsibilities. I heard it, as I have in my time heard other curious things in the same place. I don't tell it you on information received. I heard it. He took the toasting fork and sausage from me as he spoke, and set forth the age's breakfast neatly on a little tray. Previous to placing it before him, he went into the age's room with a clean white cloth, and tied the same under the old gentleman's chin, and propped him up, and put his nightcap on one side, and gave him quite a raccage. Then he placed his breakfast before him with great care, and said, "All right, ain't you, aged P?" To which the cheerful age replied, "All right, John, my boy, all right," as there seemed to be a tacit understanding that the age was not in presentable state, and was therefore to be considered invisible. I made a pretense of being in complete ignorance of these proceedings. "This watching of me at my chambers," I said to Wemmick when he came back, "is inseparable from the person to whom you have adverted, is it?" Wemmick looked very serious. I couldn't undertake to say that of my own knowledge. I mean, I couldn't understand to say it was at first, but it either is, or it will be, or it's in great danger of being. As I saw that he was restrained by fealty to Little Britain from saying as much as he could, and as I knew with thankfulness to him how far out of his way he went to say what he did, I could not press him. But I told him, after a little meditation over the fire, that I would like to ask him a question, subject to his answering or not answering as he deemed right, and sure that his course would be right. He paused in his breakfast, and crossing his arms and pinching his shirt sleeves, he nodded to me once to put my question. "You have heard of a man of bad character whose true name is Compeyson?" He answered with one other nod. "Is he living?" One other nod. "Is he in London?" He gave me one other nod, compressed the post office exceedingly, gave me one last nod, and went on with his breakfast. "Now," said Wemmick, questioning being over, which he emphasized and repeated for my guidance, "I come to what I did after hearing what I heard. I went to Garden Court to find you. Not finding you, I went to Carricker's to find Mr. Herbert." "And him you found?" said I with great anxiety. "And him I found. Without mentioning any names or going into any details, I gave him to understand that if he was aware of anybody, Tom, Jack, or Richard, being about the chambers, or about the immediate neighborhood, he had better get Tom, Jack, or Richard out of the way while you were out of the way. He would be greatly puzzled what to do. He was puzzled what to do, not the less, because I gave him my opinion that it was not safe to try to get Tom, Jack, or Richard too far out of the way at present. Mr. Pip, I'll tell you something. Under existing circumstances, there is no place like a great city where you are once in it. Don't break cover too soon. Lie close. Wait till things slacken before you try the open, even for foreign air. I thanked him for his valuable advice and asked him what Herbert had done. 即係其實佢意思即係話你係想着草，我明嘅，但係依家呢一刻似乎有人監視緊你，所以你都係唔好走住，匿埋先。I thanked him for his valuable advice and asked him what Herbert had done. Mr. Herbert, said Wemmick, after being all a heap for half an hour, struck out a plan. He mentioned to me as a secret that he is courting a young lady who has, as no doubt you are aware, a bedridden PA. A pa, which pa, having been in the pursuer line of life, lies abed in the bow window where he can see the ship sail out and down the river. You are acquainted with the young lady, most probably. Not personally, said I. The truth was that she had objected to me as an expensive companion who did Herbert no good, and that when Herbert had first proposed to present me to her, she had received the proposal with such very moderate warmth that Herbert had felt himself obliged to confide the state of the case to me, with a view to the lapse of a little time before I made her acquaintance. When I had begun to advance Herbert's prospects by stealth, I had been able to bear this with cheerful philosophy. He and his affianced, for their part, had naturally not been very anxious to introduce a third person into their interviews, and thus, although I was assured that I had risen to Clara's esteem, and although the young lady and I had long regularly interchanged messages and remembrance by Herbert, I had never seen her. However, I did not trouble Wemmick with these particulars. The house with the bow window, said Wemmick, being by the riverside, down the pool there between Limehouse and Greenwich, and being kept, it seems, by a very respectable widow who has a furnished upper floor to let, Mr. Herbert put it to me. What did I think of that as a temporary tenement from Tom, Jack, or Richard? Now, I thought very well of it, for 3 reasons I'll give you. That is to say, firstly, it's altogether out of all your beats, and is well away from the usual heap of street, great and small. Secondly, without going near it yourself, you could always hear the safety of Tom, Jack, or Richard through Mr. Herbert. Thirdly, after a while, and when it might be prudent, if you should want to slip Tom, Jack, or Richard on board a foreign packet boat, there he is, ready. Much comforted by these considerations, I thanked Wemmick again and begged him to proceed. Well, sir, Mr. Herbert threw himself into the business with a will, and by 9 o'clock last night he housed Tom, Jack, or Richard, whichever it may be, you and I don't want to know, quite successfully. At the old lodgings it was understood that he was summoned to Dover, and in fact he was taken down the Dover road and cornered out of it. Now, another great advantage of all this is that it was done without you, and when, if any one was concerning himself about your movements, you must be known to be either so many miles off and quite otherwise engaged. This diverts suspicion and confuses it. And for the same reason, I recommend that, even if you came back last night, you should not go home. It brings in more confusion, and you want confusion. Wemmick, having finished his breakfast, had looked at his watch and began to get his coat on. And now, Mr. Pip, said he, with his hands still in his sleeves, I have probably done the most I can do, but if I can ever do more, from a Walworth point of view, and in a strictly private and personal capacity, I shall be glad to do it. Here's the address. There can be no harm in your going here tonight, and seeing for yourself that all is well with Tom, Jack, or Richard, before you go home, which is another reason for you not going home last night. But after you have gone home, don't go back here. You are very welcome, I'm sure, Mr. Pip. His hands were now out of his sleeves, and I was shaking them. And you let me finally impress one important point upon you. He laid his hands upon my shoulders and added in a solemn whisper, avail yourself of this evening to lay hold of his portable property. You don't know what may happen to him. Don't let anything happen to the portable property. Quite despairing of making my mind clear to Wemmick on this point, I forbore to try. Time's up, said Wemmick, and I must be off. If you have nothing more pressing to do than to keep here till dark, that's what I should advise. You look very much worried, and it would do you good to have a perfectly quiet day with the aged. He'll be up presently, and a little bit of, you remember the pig? Of course, said I. Well, and a little bit of him. That sausage you toasted was his, and he was in all respects a first-rater. Do try him, if it is only for old acquaintance' sake. Goodbye, aged parent, in a cheery shout. All right, John, all right, my boy, piped the old man from within. I soon fell asleep before Wemmick's fire, and the aged and I enjoyed one another's society by falling asleep before it more or less all day. We had loin of pork for dinner and greens grown on the estate, and I nodded at the aged with a good intention whether I failed to do it drowsily. When it was quite dark, I left the aged preparing the fire for toast, and I inferred from the number of teacups, as well as from his glances at the 2 little doors in the wall, that Miss Skiffins was expected.
即係呢個成段就係講呢個
Wemmick 教路啦，即係教呢個 Pip 啦點樣去應付啦。咁啊 Pip 亦都醒目啦，收到呢封信第一時間做咩啊？原來就係去揾寄信俾你嗰個咯，係咪？當然又揾咗 Wemmick 先啦，係咪？即係 Wemmick 知道發生咩事啦。原來就係 Wemmick 都好清楚㗎啦，其實都知咩事㗎。咁亦都發現咗有人喺度監視住佢，而佢亦都通知咗阿 Herbert。咁佢叫 Herbert 點做咧 ？Herbert 都好驚，Herbert 都好 panic。咁但係 Herbert 就醒目咧，就揾咗啲人即係揾咗律師樓入面嗰啲人，定係唔知啲 random 嘅。我信得過應該係佢哋識得嘅人啦。然之後咧就
即係 Tom、Jack、Richard。係
啦，即係呢啲咁嘅人啦。我唔知係咪其實係佢哋間行嗰啲，佢哋律師行啲人定係出邊嗰啲？應該就係律師行啲人。咁然之後咧就其實就應該就係偷走咗出去嘅，帶住阿 Margaret 就偷走咗出去，咁就安頓咗喺另外一個地方。呢一刻係啦。咁咧，然之後咧佢就話到過一段時間，你先至帶走佢。就唔好即刻衝動去做，即係你而家諗清楚先。係啦，咁然之後佢都係喺個耳邊講咧，就係喺呢段時間咧，你最好就 secure 咗佢所有可動產，即係不動產就係啲樓啊、屋啊啲嘢啦。即係可動產，即係意思即係話錢啊，或者一啲流動性嘅資產咧，你而家最好就全部 secure 咗佢哋啦。點解咧？就因為佢可能命不久矣嘅，即係將來發生嘅嘢，佢條命仔可能真係凍過水，真係唔知發生咩事。一係就俾人拉，一係俾人唔知俾人拐咗佢，你唔知嘅所以就係提醒佢要做呢啲嘢咁咯。所以其實呢一刻嗰個心情其實都係不安啦，不安為主啦。即係縱使呢個佢留喺 Wemmick 屋企嗰度咁啊，同佢嗰個唔知係佢爸爸定係啲長輩咧一齊喺度食下嘢啊，咁都令到佢心情好咗啲嘅嚇。咁但係即係其實係不安嘅，因為佢始終點樣安置 Margaret 係都係要阿 Pip 親自去做嘅，呢啲唔係 Herbert 去做嘅。Herbert 只係幫你安置住佢先啫。但係對最尾出手帶走佢嘅都係你阿 Pip 係咪？咁所以呢一刻就阿 Pip 就我唔知佢會即刻翻去即刻做呢件事啊，定係佢又會再過多一段日？因為其實佢當晚佢亦都喺 Wemmick 屋企，佢又過咗日啦，又再拖多日啦。咁但係之後點咧？咁就要再睇。係啊，再睇好嘛，下次再講，拜拜。